I'm Meghna Misra. I am a product manager. That's who I am. I do work at a company called Pure Storage, where I'm responsible for product management, product marketing, and experience design for the as a service business unit there at Pure Storage. But fundamentally, my entire career, I've been a product manager. I love building products. That's in my DNA. That's what I do. So just a quick, journey line for me. I've worked at companies like UTC, Microsoft, and Intuit, and have built several SaaS and mobile products. So both at these corporations as well as early stage startups. And then if you know what these companies do, you'll see that it ranges all the way from elevator control systems to Microsoft technology, accounting software like QuickBooks Online, and then the healthcare industry as well. And while these domains may be very different, very varied, what doesn't change across these different companies and the products is the need for products that solve a set of problems for users. So that's what we do, whether we are in the healthcare domain or we are in accounting or financial. We all love, as product managers, we all love building products that solve problems and solve pain points, right? So what am I going to talk about today? So we build products, right? But how do you assess that your product delivers meaningful benefit to the customers? We do that by identifying and measuring success metrics. I want to share some of my experiences. I'm going to date myself, but I've been doing this for a very long time, 16 plus years, on how I have selected metrics. And then what I also want to do is to bring that to life through a case study, followed by a deep dive into some specific metrics. So that's the agenda for today. I'm more than happy to field questions at the end, so make sure that you keep them coming throughout this presentation. And Neha and Andy are going to ask those questions on your behalf. But make sure that the questions keep coming, please. So data. Data, as you know, we have a lot of data at our fingertips. And data is the foundation for a lot of the decisions that we make today, whether those are business decisions or whether they are product decisions. And then there are so many metrics that we can measure. When I talk with PMs about metrics and ask them, what do you measure? How do you measure success for your product? I often hear things like, oh, we've got 30 million page views per month with 10 million uniques. Or our product has 25% daily active use or monthly active use. Now, all of these sound very interesting, and these are useful metrics to know and measure, but they sound really interesting in the abstract. When you really dig into it, you begin to hear things like, or even understand, patterns like these 10 million uniques that we were talking about earlier. All of these come in through search engines. They click on a couple of pages and they never come back. Or the 25% daily active use is because perhaps the app is spammy and you're drawing in a lot of users and they come in really quickly, but hardly anyone or only a small section actually comes in and logs in a second time. And you know what? No one really ever pays for your product. So for these metrics to really matter, you have to ask a core question. And the core question to ask is, how do you measure meaningful interaction in the product? The way your users interact with your product, that needs to be quite meaningful. Otherwise, it really doesn't matter, despite all the data that you have at your fingertips. And when you look at metrics, like on my slide, you've got daily active use, you have CRR, you have average revenue per customer. These are all important metrics to measure, but then you really need to know which ones matter. Don't look at metrics in the abstract. Always view them in the context of your users. What are your users doing? And more importantly, why are they doing it? And it can be things like X people did 3 searches in the past week, or Y number of people made at least 1 purchase in the last 90 days. That can be a signal that if they're using the product in the way you expected them to use, and that they use it enough, then you will believe that they'll come back and use it more and more. That's what really matters. So remember, like I said, it's in the context of your users. And focus on actionable metrics as opposed to vanity metrics. And I'll talk a little bit more about what actionable metrics are and what vanity metrics are. And remember that this data at the end of the day should help you make decisions that make your products better. That's why we measure success of the product, not just to feel good about, yes, great, we solved a problem, but you want to make sure that not only are you solving a problem, but you're also engaging with your users and improving your product to make it better and better. And your metrics, the metrics that you measure to gauge success of your product, should enable you to do so. So what are vanity metrics? I think of vanity metrics as numbers or stats that look really good on paper, that make me feel really good. And to some extent, they do provide some early indication of success, but they don't always necessarily correlate to what matters. Now, actionable metrics, on the other hand, are tied to outcomes, like tangible outcomes, and they can help you make decisions that in turn help improve your product. And what are output and input metrics? So let's talk about output metrics first. Output metrics are results. Most of our goals, all the goals that we set, whether they are business goals or organizational goals or product goals, a lot of those are set around output metrics. Examples could be, 5 million in sales, or 500K in profit, or customer PS scores. Now, output metrics these are lagging indicators of success, but they're really good at measuring where we are at, getting a baseline of our reality, and allowing us to set goals against. So they're important. But what they don't do is help us with our day-to-day behavior and the decisions that help us improve our products on a day-to-day basis. Input metrics, on the other hand, think about input metrics as behaviors. So a good way to look at input metrics are behaviors that in turn influence output metrics. They are usually leading indicators of success and very useful to consider when you don't want to wait for your lagging indicators. So for example, think about trial to sub conversion. Typically, you have a trial period of 45 days or a month, or 45 days or even 60 days. Are you really, and that's a very important output metric, but are you really going to wait for 60 days to see whether your product was successful till you get the trial to sub conversion and a statistically significant number there? Or are you going to wait for your, ARR, your profit to come through, or your NPS result to come through before you make any decisions? That's where input metrics or these behaviors become very, very important. And examples of input metrics are, usage, your daily usage, your second day logins or third day logins, that's the return visits, the time that you expect your users to spend on the task, or your attach rates for not just specific products, but also for your workflows. And I'll walk you through an example. Unfortunately, we can't do this in person live. So, but I do want you to use the chat functionality when we get to the case study. So before you figure out which metrics you should be tracking, you need to determine what your goals are. Goals for your business and goals for your product. Because tracking metrics that aren't aligned with your goals is just going to be not very useful at all. And it's a straight path to failure. I did put a quote up there from Eric Ries that says, the only metrics that entrepreneurs should invest energy in collecting are those that help them make decisions. I truly believe that if you are not able to make decisions in a timely manner based on the metrics that you see, the data that you have, there's no point in collecting that data. All right, so this is the case study. I'll give you a couple of minutes to read through this, but I'm also going to talk through the case study. Think of yourself as a product manager for the first time use experience for a product that serves product-based businesses, both in stores and now a lot online. Your product allows these small businesses to manage inventory, publish products across multiple marketplaces. So think Shopify, Amazon, and both platforms as well as e-commerce platforms, and also manage order fulfillment and ship products to customers. So you are the product management manager that's responsible for enhancing the first time use experience. And the first time use experience consists of three components: creating a sales receipt template with logo and colors that reflect your customer's brand. That's very important for businesses, that the product that they use should reflect their brand. Their logo should show up on the sales receipt. It should reflect the tone of what their brand stands for. So that's one. The second is adding a marketplace or e-commerce platform. So for example, today, perhaps this product is being sold on Amazon, and your user, which is a small business, wants to list those products on Shopify as well. So how easy or difficult is it to add a marketplace or e-commerce platform? And the third is, if you're selling a product, if your customer is selling a product, then they need to be able to receive money, provide refunds or returns. So it's important for them to be able to connect their bank account. Now, your product offers a 30-day trial period. So think about this, trial to sub conversion here, and then followed by a month-to-month subscription. So it is a SaaS product. Think about what metrics you would use to measure success of your first time use flow. So the first time use experience being your user, who's a small business owner, coming in and experiencing how they set up this product. So take a couple of minutes and please use the chat functionality to put in a couple of metrics that you think we should be thinking of as product managers. So since we are not doing this live, I did pick some metrics that I thought would be interesting for you to see. And then, you can see whether you are, I'm going to look at the, I don't know if, did anybody add anything to the chat?
Yep, we have something, Leslie.
Just questions, all right. All right, so we're going to go to the metrics now. So which metrics would you choose? I can tell you the ones that I picked. Let's talk about output metrics first. There are many output metrics that we could pick, but I picked Net Promoter Score, lifetime value, and conversion as the three metrics that I would pick for output metrics. And then for input metrics, I picked usage, task completion, and second and third logins. I talked a little bit about, second and third logins when I was giving the example earlier, where it's really important to make sure that your user, in this case, a small business owner, is not just logging into the first time use flow for the first time and never coming back again. It's also important, given the three setup tasks that I had listed in the case study, that they complete tasks. And how long does it take for them to complete tasks? Do they set up their bank account, but also come and add another marketplace to the product? And then usage. How are they using the different functionality? So it's really important to measure that early on, because when you think about the output metrics, you really don't want to wait for conversion, which happens after 30 days, or even NPS, which perhaps you should not, which you obviously should not be measuring at the onset. You need your users to use your product for a certain period of time before you start thinking about Net Promoter Score and asking them how they feel about Net Promoter Score. And then LTV, lifetime value, that's a calculated value. You again will not be able to calculate the lifetime value until a certain time period has elapsed. So output metrics, always very important. They're aligned to your business goals and outcomes, but don't really help you make decisions for the product that your input metrics would. So in this case, if you realize that the task completion for adding a bank account is taking a very long time, you need to make some changes there so that you don't see abandonment rates, you don't see your users not coming in for the second or the third login. Make sense? Okay. So I'm going to talk a little bit about usage and NPS, because these are very critical metrics when you want to measure success, both for input as well as output metrics. So what is usage? Usage data helps shed light when things get a little foggy, and it makes sure that you're tackling the right problem and that you remain on task, because you really have to filter through what's a major news event. So what are the workflows that you need to pay attention to, that your user needs to use and complete, and then what's not. That's what product usage really defines. And in order to do so, it's very important for you to understand who your core users are and distinguish your core users from your power users. Also, make sure that you have a very clear point of view on who you're solving for first. So, who's your primary user, whether it's the core user or whether it's the power users? Why do they use your product? What problems are they trying to solve? Does your product and does the product usage then correlate to the workflows that you expect them to do, which leads to the third point. What are their key behaviors and interactions? Are they interacting with a product the way you expect them to interact? And then how often are they performing these actions? So do you expect, like, I've been using the example of a bank account. You expect them to, at at the least, of course, attach one bank account, at the most perhaps two or three, but no more than that. So you don't expect them to attach like 5 bank accounts, because most likely they have a business account and that's the one that they would be attaching. So be very clear about how often you expect them to perform these actions. Um, and then in order to do that, in order to track whether usage and whether your customers are really, really using your product in a meaningful way, it's important to identify cohorts. And for those of you, I'm sure all of you are familiar with cohorts, but for those of you who aren't, really quickly, cohort is a group of people who share common characteristics during a period of time. So what cohort analysis does is it allows product managers to ask a very specific question and analyze only the relevant data associated and then take action on it. So, for example, to gauge implementation of an analytics program, rather than looking at all of your users as a single unit, you can do a cohort analysis and then break them into groups for analysis. And then, try and identify patterns at multiple points in the customer journey and the customer life cycle. Because again, these patterns will help guide product decisions that suit your users more effectively and will allow you to enhance the user experience. And cohorts can look something like, all the signups that happened in the past 30 days, or users that were acquired through social media campaigns. The important takeaway here is that cohort analysis will allow you to ask, like I said, very, very specific questions in the context of your users. And then the other thing you want to do is you want to dig into the why. So why is it that your users are behaving a certain way? Because that in turn will help you determine the correlations and causality from the data, and then help you refine some of the decisions that you were planning to make. What's also important is when you think about cohorts, even within your cohorts, it's important to identify certain sets of customers who I like to call friendlies, because these are your go-to customers. You always go to them. Maybe you've engaged with them during the design of the product. So you've co-designed some of the product with them, or you've gone to them for early feedback and done usability studies with them. So build that relationship, because data is great, but you also need to understand the why behind the data. And these friendlies will allow you to do so. You can go and talk to them after the fact. All right. So from usage, that's an input metric. I'm going to switch to NPS. As all of you know, Net Promoter Score, I think it was developed about 18 years ago by Bain's Fred Reichheld. And since then, it has become the single biggest indicator of success for the products. I think there was a recent poll for product managers that said that about 60% of product managers use NPS as a critical metric for understanding how their users feel about their products. And it's a very simple calculation of your customers' willingness to recommend your brand. All you do is ask them, how likely are you to recommend us to a friend or a colleague? And on a scale of 0 to 10, 0 to 6 being your detractors, 7 to 8 passive, so it doesn't really matter, and then 9 and 10 are your promoters. And it's a super simple calculation. Your percentage promoters minus percentage detractors gives you your NPS. So it can range from -100 to all the way through +100. And the interesting thing is, it is such a simple score, But by doing this, you can use it as a benchmark for not just your product, but also how are you doing within your industry. That's important. It's very important to compare within your industry and your domain, because comparing yourself against Apple may not be the right thing to do. Or, comparing yourself, I work for Pure Storage. Our NPS, our published NPS score is super high. In fact, that's one of the things that attracted me to this product. We have an 86.6 NPS score. And at that time, I was working for a product where my NPS score was 23. Not a fair comparison to make. Very different users, consumers versus enterprises. The products are very different, but NPS, when you look at it in the context of your user base and your industry, gives you a lot of insight about your product and how you need to make it better. So now NPS has taken hold, like I was saying, is because it's a very simple and it's a very easily computable metric. But while there's a lot of good in NPS, when it is used in isolation, so if you just look at the score, it turns into a vanity metric pretty fast. Like, I'm sure you heard the passion in my voice when I said 86.6, and, you get bragging rights, but what does that really mean? So how do you make it actionable? So you know that you're, either high or low based on your industry average. How do you make it actionable? What do you do with that information? What do you do with that single number that you get? And then how do you increase it? So I use a 3-step process to, make it very actionable. First is asking that question in context. So one of the biggest limitations of most NPS survey is sample size and distribution. You need to have a statistically significant sample size. And it'll come as no surprise to any of you that email is not the most effective way of reaching your audience to solicit feedback. In fact, it's ironic that if you send an email again to them asking them for feedback, it actually lowers your NPS score because it's unsolicited and it's bugging. So asking the NPS question in context when your user is most engaged is very, very critical. And the best way to do that is directly in your product. Now, be mindful. When your user is logging into your product, what is it that they want to do? They have a task at hand. They want to go and, whatever your product is, complete that. So, for example, if it is a product that allows you to monitor another product, they want to go and see the health of the product. They're not interested in taking an NPS survey. So asking them at login time is probably not the best idea. Asking them at log out time might give you a better chance of them responding. Now, of course, they might be in a hurry, but you don't want to restrict or add friction into your product by asking that question either too early or too late. That's very important. The second thing is combining quantitative and qualitative. So NPS does answer how your customers feel, but not why they feel that way. So without an understanding of, what's driving that positive or negative sentiment, it's hard to take a specific action against it. So combine qualitative along with the quantitative, think back to the friendlies comment I made earlier, ask them why. You can always follow up with them about the NPS score, and then segment your score. So one of the reasons why NPS has limited insight is because while it's simple, it's also very broad. So when you combine the quantitative data with the qualitative data, that definitely helps. But then another strategy is to break down the score by specific segments. So, that segmentation obviously depends on your business. Users have different attributes that can lead to better insights. So the role that they have within the context of the product, their geolocation, or the tenure, how long have they been users of your product? The language that they use, do they use a mobile app, your mobile app along with a web app? So these are just ways for you to think about user segmentation and then targeting and also analyzing your NPS survey results. I'd say just in summary, the best product managers take the best of NPS. They take the simplicity of NPS, they combine it with behavioral, transactional, and some other operational data sources, and they get to the all-important why. Otherwise, NPS just becomes a vanity bragging metric and doesn't really allow you to make decisions that make your products better. Okay, so just go-dos, learn how to dig through your data and get to the why. Run your experiments rapidly. So you don't want to waste time with long cycles. Learn to experiment and learn from those experiments. And then make sure that you know what metrics you want to measure prior to the test. Because if you're not thinking about the metrics that you want to measure, you're not going to instrument for them, and you will introduce unnecessary friction in your product, or you won't get the answers to those metrics. And then make big bets, like big, bold bets. Have your, take your leap of faith, make big bets, and be scrappy. So you don't always have to, build a product in order to assess whether it's an effective product or not and whether it solves the problem it was intended to solve. You can be scrappy, you can do wireframes, you can build prototypes, you can go talk to customers. Just make sure you don't ask leading questions. But that's how you build really great products. And then, while metrics are very important and data is king, we all live and breathe data. Don't forget that at the end of the day, you have humans using your product. I like this quote from Professor Young May Moon. If we pay attention to things that we can measure, we will only pay attention to the things that are easily measurable. And in the process, we will miss a lot. So make sure that you always remember that it's about your users. You maintain that connection with your users. You can always, take that data and go speak with your users, talk to them, get feedback from them, close the loop with them on the why behind, and ensure that you're constantly testing and validating with them throughout the process and not just at the very end. So whether you're looking at input metrics or output metrics, whether you're looking at vanity or actionable metrics, have that connection with your users, because that's who we build products for. And all of us at the end of the day want to impact the lives of our users in a meaningful way. All right, so that's it. I think I took about 30 minutes, less than 30 minutes. So Neha, do you want to go jump to questions? I can stop sharing.
Yeah, that was great. That was perfect timing, Meghna. Yeah, we've got tons of questions. So and I think if they're coming in the chat and some are coming in the Q&A. So let's start with the first one from Lara Peterson. She asked, how do you deal with core engagement usage that is very low frequency? In enterprise SaaS, to experience the core engagement, it has a low frequency experience every month or once every 3 months. How do you create the other key behaviors that you can measure in the interim to get in front of retention?
Okay, so if I understand the question, and Lara, please do clarify if I don't get this correctly. Your goal is to get in front of retention. So you want to retain your users, right? And rightly so, like you've said in your question, that retention, an indicator of retention is engagement with your product. So enterprise SaaS is definitely different than B2B SaaS, small business SaaS, or consumer SaaS. Mm-hmm. You may not have usage on a daily, like you may not be able to measure daily active use, but you can measure either weekly or monthly active use. And the reason that helps is because you can establish patterns. You can establish trends. You can look at seasonality. If you know your customers well and you know the problem that you're trying to solve, it's not just the usage itself. So it's not just the log and the amount of adoption that you get from from a monthly active use. It's also, what are they doing in the product? Think about some of those workflows that you expect them to perform when they get to the product. And, without knowing much about the product that you're talking about, I think you did mention that it was financial. I'm more than happy to chat with you offline and get into very specifics. But just broadly speaking, I would say, look at adoption, look at whether those same customers are coming back. So the uniques, are they coming back, on a monthly basis? are there patterns that you can discern from their usage within the product itself? And that will help. And then, NPS does help. If you've got a core set of users, ask them, how do they feel about recommending this product to a colleague? Just make sure that those questions are really short, because we all know that we all have short attention spans. Ask the question, my best practice is, which we've been using a lot in our product, is if they are a detractor, so 0 to 6, ask them why. If they are a passive, ask them how they would like to see improvements. And if they're a promoter, definitely ask them if they want to see more improvements in the product. So just no more than 2 questions, make it optional, and then reach back to your users, because most likely you do have that, especially in the enterprise segment, you do have a relationship with them either through your account team or directly. Reach out to them. Customers, in my experience, love to hear from product managers. They like sales, but they love product managers because they also feel like, and it's true, they can influence the direction of the product. So reach out to them through your sales team, account team, or directly, and talk to them.
Okay, cool. The next one is from Leslie. For lead input metrics, what is the best cadence to measure? And how often do you make commitments based on input metrics? Or, differently put, how would you use input metrics to make better product decisions?
So great question, like fantastic question. The cadence, actually, it obviously depends on the specific input metric that you're trying to measure. But let me give you an example for this, and that might help. So an important input metric to measure is not just the first time login that we've been talking about, but the second day login. So it again depends on your product. Like Laura's product may not have a second day login because it's a monthly use product by enterprise customers. But how often are your customers coming back? How often are they, again, what's the time that it takes for them to complete that entire workflow? Do you expect them to spend more time? Like, I see a lot of product managers measuring the time spent on a page. That may not necessarily be a good thing. I'll give you an example about my product. So one of the products that I lead, it's a management software over all your assets in your data center. Okay, so it's a management software. It's also a monitoring software. I honestly don't want my users to go in for an input metric. So if I'm tracking usage, I don't want my users to log into the web product and look at the monitoring pages to monitor the health of the product. And why is that? Even though it's a monitoring product, I expect the usage that I want to track as an input metric is mobile app. We send notifications when a particular asset, or whether it's an array or it's a VM, fails, right? We send you notifications. So I would expect that they don't have to go to the desktop product ever. Why would they? Proactively, we can send them alerts and notifications if it's higher than the threshold that they set it at. So that would be an input metric that I would be measuring. And in terms of the cadence, it just depends on the specific input metric that you're talking about. But because input metrics help you make decisions that make your product better, you don't have to wait for that 1 month or 3 month cycle for the output metrics. I'd say keep an eye on it. At least on a weekly basis, if not a daily basis. When I've been managing products, that's the first thing I do. I can't help myself. I go into work. The first thing I do in the morning is check all my metrics. And like I said, it's very important that you think about them early on, because if you don't instrument for them, you're not going to be able to see it. I hope that helps. Feel free to follow up with more questions if you have, if I can answer it better.
Yeah, of course. That was great. Very helpful, Meghna. Next one's from Lara again. How do you get to scale NPS and other engagement metrics when you have an enterprise product and low number of customers? So NPS may not be an indicator because of statistical
significance.
Significance, correct.
Yeah, you're spot on. At that point, it's just your sample size is not statistically significant enough for you to, derive some meaningful metrics out of NPS. I think in that case, what would be critical is the connection that you have with your customers and talking to them. It's not just talking to them and asking them, do you like my product? Do you, use the product? Um, Following your customer, observing them in their workplace, in their setting, now over Zoom or WebEx, not actually at their workplace, is a good way for you to get a sense for how your customers are interacting with your product. And that observation, in a lot of ways, is a silent observation. So don't ask questions. If it's possible for you to do a tag along, I've done that with my healthcare providers. Obviously, had to get a lot of shots and fill out all the HIPAA forms. But I've accompanied nurses and clinicians when they've gone, for post-acute care, when they've gone to the patient's home, and seen how they use the product to do a check-in with the patient, and just quietly, observe, do you expect them to click here, or do you expect them to use, because you can get to the same point through multiple ways in the product. So, observation is very critical, and then following up with more qualitative questions on the why behind it. That would be helpful. It's really tricky and not a great place to be when you've got just a handful of enterprise customers, and enterprise customers specifically are notoriously not very engaged and active with the product managers, but try and build that relationship. Something else that I found useful is engaging with them during the design or asking for their opinion early on, because that drives engagement. So just ask them, and then ask the question. If you've got 5, not statistically significant, but it still gives you some data, and that is always better than no data at all.
And the power of the qualitative input that you get, which is,
Yes.
That's where you find the golden nuggets. Yep, excellent. The next one is from Varun. He says, how to think about segments and cohorts separately. How would you combine or prioritize which segments and cohorts should you measure?
Okay. So when I think about cohorts, it's that set of people who share common characteristics. And so there is some overlap with segments as well. But cohorts are a little more specific. So think about segments. I'm just going to use this example. So let's say you have a product that serves different industry verticals. So you have a product that spans healthcare, that spans, food and food and hospitality, manufacturing. So those could be, so your industry verticals could be your different segments. Okay, that would be an example of a segment. Now, when you're thinking about a cohort, you could take a cohort within one industry segment, or you could take a cohort across these industry segments. So you could pick users that you've acquired or signed up in the last 15 days or in the month of, let's say, May. Okay, perhaps you released a feature in the month of May or April, and then and you expected that to drive some user signups. So you could take your cohort as users in the food and hospitality segment who have signed up for your product in the month of May, and you can always add more and more qualifiers, and who you acquired through a specific channel. So that would be an example of a cohort. So you can mix both cohorts and segments depending on, again, what is that question that you're trying to answer? What metric are you trying to measure? Your cohort would depend, a lot of that would depend on your cohort. And you don't want just one cohort, you want like multiple cohorts, and you want to track them for a period of time as well. And make sure you've got your control set, and make sure you have your cohort, and then you measure against both.
Yep, absolutely. And it also depends on the question you're trying to answer. You can identify a cohort based on the question. Okay. Next one is from John. He asks, how do you establish a relationship between input and an output metric?
Great question. So how do you do that? You do that by understanding your product really well and understanding your users really well. So a lot of these output metrics, while they are pretty standard, like NPS is an output metric, that's a pretty standard metric. Your 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 attach rate is, again, another output metric that's pretty standard. What is it? Let's take attach rate, for example. You have a product that, and I'm just making this up, so bear with me. You have a product that that your user is using. Actually, let's go back to my case study. Your user is a small business owner, right? And they are selling products. They're a product-based business, so they sell products across their store as well as their e-commerce channel. An output metric to measure in that case would be, how many customers are you as a product owner acquiring for these product-based businesses? So what's your penetration rate in a specific geo? That would be an output metric that you would measure. In order to do that, there are certain input metrics that you would have to measure, and those input metrics could be, within that geo, what's your expectation? Are there, or an industry segment would actually be a better answer here. So let's say you've got product-based businesses that are mostly, storefront. Now, in this situation where people are all going online, you expect to see attach for e-commerce marketplaces. So that would be an input metric that you would then track, because if they are using your product to attach to e-commerce websites, that means they're using your product to sell their products, which in turn means, 3 months down, you would have acquired a lot of those customers for that particular industry segment. So that would be one example of how you could correlate. But ultimately, it's about knowing your product, knowing what your product does, the problem that it's trying to solve. And, we talked about in the enterprise world, for a particular product, daily active use not making much sense. So your monthly active use or your weekly active use in that case would be something that you would correlate then back to your either acquisition or retention. I mean, retention is another great output metric that you should be tracking, retention or churn. Sometimes it's also about churn, and the way you would use an input metric to track churn is if you don't see people logging in. So you've got a segment of customers that haven't logged into your product for the last 30 days, whereas you do have a daily active usage product, right? So if you have users coming in and using your product on a daily basis, but you have certain customers who haven't logged into your product for the last 30 days, that's an input metric that you should keep an eye on, which in turn influences your churn or your retention metric. I hope that makes sense. I saw a comment from Ping to all panelists, and I just want to share that with everybody. Observation is a great way to learn how users are using the product. Oftentimes, we as PMs know the product too well, so we assume experiences, but it's helpful to see their interactions. So, +1 on that, it's really critical. We live and breathe our products every day, so naturally we make assumptions. Just remember that whatever assumptions we make and whatever we think we know are opinions, you need to validate them with your users, always.
Absolutely. We've got one from an anonymous attendee. How can you account for cultural differences with NPS if your product is offered in different countries?
I think that's where the segmentation matters. Understand your users, understand where they're coming from. And so that's actually a really great question. And I do want to give a quick example about that. So culturally, you will have to factor that in. So segment your users, take out specific segments and then calculate your NPS score. It's a similar example. So not cultural differences, but let's say you revamp your product, right? So you've got an existing set of users who love your product. You've just moved their cheese because they're used to coming into the product. Just imagine how much flack Slack got when they changed their logo. Remember all the hue and cry on social media about that? And that was just the logo that they changed. So let's say you've revamped your product. You've revamped the experiences, the user experience in the product. So you've got existing customers. They're not going to like that, right? The reason you revamped your product is because you truly believe not just believe, but you've also validated with users, both existing and net new users, that it's going to be a better experience for them. It helps them get through the product faster, gets them to benefit faster, right? So in that case, look at your existing user NPS and also look at your net user, your net new to franchise user NPS. I'll give you an example without telling you what that product is. I was leading a product and my NPS, and we completely changed the user experience. My NPS with existing users for a period of time dipped into the negatives. For new users, the new acquisitions who had never seen the previous version of the product and who we were bringing into the new experience, their NPS was in the 80s. So going back to your question about cultural differences, you've got to be able to factor that in. So segmented based on location or segmented based on whatever that specific difference is, and then put that in context.
Yep, thank you. By Pi, sorry if I'm mispronouncing any of these names, apologies. Is it possible to collect the success points after you finish the project? If so, if the project is small and hard to collect the numbers, what do you recommend using as success points, and how do you measure success for projects where your usage is actually fairly low? Usage numbers.
So if I understand this question correctly, it's about collecting success metrics after the fact, right? Not impossible to do. Your usage is low, so that itself should be a huge indicator of success or not so success of the product, because usage, if people are not using your product, then it's likely not working. It's likely not solving the problem that it was intended to solve. Even with low usage, it's important to track what they're doing. So you can always go and build that back into the product. And let's say, you've lost your development team, or they've moved on to build other features and functionality, happens all the time, or you're a startup and you don't really have the resources to go and re-instrument your product. Frankly, the only other way of doing this is to reach out to your customer base and try and understand. Another way to do this is almost like relaunch that product again, but in a scrappy way, and try and track your cohort from the time that it was relaunched, because then, it's almost like you're resetting the baseline there. So even if you haven't measured, you can have some creative way of tracking the users, being able to, send them surveys if you can't show it in the product. Not super effective, but again, some data is better than none, because it does give you some insight, even if you can't have the correlations over a wide set. It gives you some insight. And my philosophy is whatever you can learn is better than where you're at without any data or without any insights from your customers.
Super, thank you. Another one from anonymous attendee. What if the output metrics are showing positive signals, but they don't align with the expected input metrics?
Then someone's doing something wrong. Perhaps the correlation doesn't exist between the input and the output metrics. So that could be one reason. The other reason could be that you're not measuring the right things for your input metrics. It's fairly difficult. In my experience, input metrics are usually, like I said, output metrics are quite standard. We know what they are. It's the input metrics that you have to pay a lot more attention to and figure out what you need to measure in order to then impact your output metrics. So somewhere the dots are not being connected, and some more thought needs to go into what the input metrics are. It does happen. Catch those early and then look back into your product and go, what is this? So here's the thing. When you think, whether it's input metric or output metric, you should always have a target. You may not have a baseline because you've never done this before, but you should always have a target or an understanding of what that target is. And often it is data that you either have or your gut. And something that I've always relied on is gut, because gut doesn't come just happen. It's based on your experience. You may not realize it, but it's always based on your experience. It's based on what you do, what you learn, all the input, all the stimuli that you get on a daily basis. And in the absence of data, go with your gut. What's the worst case? You'll be wrong. All right. Were you right to begin with? Probably not. But at least you've done something and you've learned from it. And course correct, gauge, assess, course correct as needed. And don't be afraid to. I've made a lot of mistakes in my career, and I've learned a lot from them. And hopefully we don't make the same mistakes again and again. But just pick yourself up and experiment, learn, and move forward.
Yeah, that's great advice. Don't be afraid to make mistakes.
Yeah. No, we make them all the time. I mean, I could spend the next hour talking about all the mistakes that I've made as a product manager and what I've learned from them.
Absolutely. Yeah. And you learn from those. So yeah, that's great. I think we have one more in the chat from Mark. Could you recommend any products or applications we can use and integrate with our products for collecting NPS? Maybe
Yeah,
we can share the one.
It's super easy to build one. I just had an intern build an NPS survey for us. So it's super easy to build one. However, there are some great products in the market. I can suggest one that I've used, so I have experience with. I've used user voice in the past and integrated it with the product. And this was for QuickBooks Online. I think they still use user voice for collecting NPS, and there's like fantastic integration there. This was a few years ago, so I'm sure they've improved on the product. But the reason I like to build my own NPS survey is because it's super easy, and then you can get all the data and keep all the data and process it the way you want to. Like I said, I had an intern build it for our product 2 weeks ago.
That's awesome. Talented intern.
Very talented. We're definitely hiring him.
Nice. Okay, I think that's it, and perfect timing. We're right on the dot. And then looks like there's, so they're asking, was it an intern PM or an engineer?
Great question, engineer.
Engineer.
I was the PM over that. That was my pet project, and so I didn't have my team work on it. I just worked with the intern, and super smart intern.
That's awesome. So yeah, there's a subtle cue there. Hire more interns. Give more opportunities to, especially during these times. Yeah. Okay.
I think I learned a lot from the intern.
Yes. We have fresh of ideas, new, unbiased. Speaking of NPS, we want to continue improving our webinars and the content. So we will be sending out an email to all attendees and everybody who registered. So we request you to share your feedback, and we'll also pass on the feedback to Meghna anonymously. But we'd love to learn on, what you thought about this webinar. What are some of the ways we can improve it? So look out from something from Products That Count. Andy, do you have anything you want to wrap up with? Else we'll call it good to go.
No, just wanted to say thanks to Meghna for the excellent presentation, and to our sponsors at Amplitude, and all of you for attending tonight. It was really excellent webinar. So thanks everybody.
Yes.
Thank you all for the opportunity.
Thank you so much,
Meghna. Pleasure. Thank you.
Meghna, one quick thing. If people want to get in touch with you, should they reach out on LinkedIn, or do you want to share?
Absolutely. LinkedIn, Meghna Misra. Happy to connect with all of you. If you have any further questions, or there's something that wasn't very clear, please do reach out. As you can tell, I'm very passionate about this, and I love interacting with product managers and other folks too, and engineers and interns. Happy to chat.
Thank you so much. Thank you all. Have a good evening. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye everyone.